Hello, I'm Dan Bloom. I'm the Mirror's online political editor, and I've been covering the latest changes to the coronavirus rules over the last couple of days. So you can't have missed now that from Monday, it's going to be illegal to gather in groups of more than 6 in England, and that includes pretty much everywhere, private homes, your private garden, pubs and restaurants, and it also includes public places like the park or the beach. However, there are some quite big exemptions to this policy. So if your household is more than 6 people, or your support bubble together with your household makes more than 6 people, you are still allowed to gather together. What you can't do is then meet someone from outside your household if that would bring the overall number to more than 6. So if you're a house of 7 people, you can meet together, but you can't bring an 8th person in from outside the household. Now, there are also exemptions for school, for work, and other things, like you're allowed to go to the pub and be next to other strangers in the pub, socially distanced, but you're not allowed to go with a group of 8 of your own friends to the pub. Now, you may think these rules are quite unfair, and indeed they are quite arbitrary. And the reason they're arbitrary is because the previous set of rules was very complicated. So what the government has done is to try and simplify the rules. The problem there is that it throws up winners and losers because it's so arbitrary. So, for example, if you're a family of 3, you can meet another family of 3 and have Sunday lunch together. If you're a family of 5, you can't have both your grandparents or four grandparents around at the same time for Sunday lunch, because that would push it over the limit of 6. So what I want to do here is do my best, and I can't promise that I will answer all your questions, but do my best to answer your questions about what practically these restrictions mean, and try to keep it to sort of practical things if you can. So I'm going to start and rattle through as many as I can, starting with Cheryl Brown. What about university students? What are the rules for them? The rules, quite simply, are that you go back to university and that there is an exemption for educational purposes. So students are allowed still to gather in, for example, a lecture theatre, if that's what it takes. However, it's meant to be socially distanced and COVID secure is how the government is phrasing it. And now this is obviously not perfect policy. You've had a story out this morning, in fact, about a minister saying to students, please don't spread the virus in Freshers Week, which is probably the least COVID secure thing you could ever imagine, including in the bedroom, not to put too fine a point upon it. So the rules are universities going back, but it doesn't mean it's not controversial. Sophie Lloyd, are we going to be in another lockdown? Now, it depends what you mean, Sophie. If you mean a national lockdown, the government does not want to do that. And that's, in fact, why they brought in these extra measures. So Boris Johnson is claiming he wants everyone to obey these rules to avoid having to do another national lockdown, because that would be a huge problem. What you might see, however, is more local lockdowns. So in Bolton, pubs and restaurants have been told to close to all but takeaways, and close entirely, even as takeaways, after 10 p.m. And that's a new policy. We've not had a sort of curfew in the UK before. That's the first one. And we might see more of that. Government sources are very clear that you might see more of these local measures, town by town. The problem with that, of course, is that you're trying to stamp on the outbreaks of whack-a-mole, as Boris Johnson has called it. But you can't, if there are too many moles, you can't whack them all at the same time. So national lockdown isn't being ruled out, but it's not the preferred option. So Linda Knight asks, why Monday? I can see why she asks, because it means that people might take it upon themselves to have one last weekend of fun where they go out and break all the rules and infect lots of people. That is a problem. What ministers say is that they wanted to give people time to digest the rules, make sure they understand them so that they have no excuses by the time it comes in on Monday. So Emma has 7 children. Does that mean we can't add to them? Why can't schools go back to doing Zoom classes from home in that case? So I assume what you mean, Emma, is can your children have friends around to play? No, they can't. And this policy is quite unfair for your children, because it's simply, the bigger your family, the more sort of restricted you are, because you have less freedom to go out and meet other people. If you had 7 children, of which some are teenagers, you could send some of them out, to go to friends' houses and make up the numbers to 6 by having other friends around. But if all your children are very young, Emma, then obviously you wouldn't want to do that. So it's a problem. The thing about going back to Zoom classes is that ministers and quite a lot of educational experts as well, and in fairness, the Labour Party, have all said that the sort of remote learning has not been good enough for kids, because there's a lot of inequality about how kids learn when they haven't got the teacher's watchful eye on them, and that learning in person, if it can be done properly, is better, even though there's a risk of being infected. Sam Miller says, am I within my parental rights to keep my children off school? This sounds harsh, but it's not from me, but not particularly, no. The government have said they want kids back in school, in England at least, and that applies even if you were shielding during the major lockdown. And some children, if they are kept off school, the parents could face fines for absence, as they did before the coronavirus era. Those fines were sort of suspended over the lockdown, obviously, and then when schools started coming back in June. And so there was a bit of ambiguity then, but the government has said that they want it to be back to normal in September, even though clearly things are not back to normal. So you can argue over the rights and wrongs of that one. Is it true we'll be given a 10 p.m. curfew? There have been reports about that there will be a 10 p.m. curfew nationally. A few things to say about this. Downing Street has been steering us quite strongly that this is not a national 10 p.m. curfew we're talking about. This is talking about doing what happened in Bolton more. So on other towns and cities that have rising rates of coronavirus, like Bolton did. The other thing is that it's not a true curfew. A curfew in the pure sense of the word is when you are told to stay in your house completely and not leave, except maybe for work or something like that. What we're talking about here is closing all the pubs, bars, takeaway drinks, takeaway food outlets, that sort of thing, at 10 p.m. So it is a sort of curfew, but it's not a full-blown stay in your house or get arrested curfew. So it's local and it's not full-blown. We might have some other more questions coming in. Why won't Parliament fill up if you're expecting classrooms to fill up? Well, Damien, this is one of the arguments that has been going on the whole time. The one thing I would say is that both Parliament and classrooms are at least supposed to be COVID secure, so they have fewer people in the House of Commons chamber and in the offices, and also fewer kids in the classroom. Now, I'm sure what you would say, Damien, if you could feed back to me, is that that doesn't work all the time, because you've got the realities of how are these schools going to fit all the kids into the classroom. And there is potentially an unfairness there, and that is why, rather than saying to schools you can stay away, the government tried to level it out by saying to MPs you have to come back, and that was quite controversial with some MPs. But yes, people undoubtedly, Parliament is very high profile, so it's been quite good at spacing people out and sticking to the rules, with a few notable exceptions, like a Tory meeting that was packed with people the other week to hear Boris Johnson. So there is always going to be an argument there. Kat Marie, what's happening about the big races event at Doncaster weekend? Shouldn't this be cancelled? I'm so sorry, Kat. I'm only one person and I don't have the answer for you. I believe there may have been news about this, and perhaps our social team can check back while I'm chatting, or I can come back to this one later. But what they have said about sport events that were going to be piloted, live sport with crowds, is that those pilots are being scaled back. So they're only going to have 1,000 people at the most. And if they're in high coronavirus areas, they're not going to go ahead. And the whole idea of bringing people back into stadiums from October the 1st is being kind of postponed altogether, and it might not happen. Leslie says, what do families do with the extra kids if there's more than 6 in the household? Do you just kick a couple of out of the house? No, you don't, Leslie, definitely not. The rules are that if your household, the people you live with, total more than 6 people, then that is okay. That is allowed, absolutely fine. Definitely don't kick your kids out. Okay, just waiting for a couple of extra questions. From Julie, can a group of 8 from 3 households go on holiday sharing a cottage in the UK? I suspect, Julie, this is not going to be good news for you, but no, you can't. That will be illegal from Monday. There is no exemption for holidays. And if you're sharing a cottage, then clearly that is a gathering of people. If 2 people want to drop out, then you would be able to go on that holiday because it would be 6 people. Even if you are from 3 different households, it's a hard limit of 6 people. It used to matter how many households you were from, and now that doesn't really count anymore. 6 people is the thing to remember. Kerry Ann Dean is right. Weddings and funerals are not affected by this. However, they are already affected by COVID secure rules anyway. So you can't have a wedding in any kind of the word that we would usually recognize. You can have a wedding ceremony and reception with up to 30 people, but it has to be COVID secure. You're not allowed dancing at the reception, and people are advised to wear face coverings, I think, during the ceremonies. And funerals are a similar thing where you can have 30 people, but it has to be socially distant. It's very difficult because, people's first instinct as a funeral is to, hug and console each other. Amy Victoria Broomhead, is every flight coming into the UK having to quarantine? No, they're not. You may think that this is contradictory because we've just been cracking down, but the travel rules haven't particularly changed. They're still running by this system where some countries are on the sort of green list where you don't have to quarantine at all, and some countries are on the red list where you have to quarantine for 14 days when you get back. Spain and France are both on that list, I believe. What they are doing is they're tightening up the rules slightly, where they want to make sure that everyone who goes on holiday fills out the forms about where they will be staying, when they'll be coming back, and all that sort of thing before they leave, so that before they even leave the UK, so that the government has a track on people and when they're coming back and knows more about where people should be. Amy Pearson, why 6? We're a family of 4, so can only meet with couples. I can't meet my sister and her children, even though we work together. That is a very important loophole in the law that you've pointed out, Amy. You can meet people for work purposes, and yet you can't meet them at home. It's very difficult. And as I said, the government has basically confessed that this is quite an arbitrary limit. They had to pick a number. 6 was decided as the best of many numbers for a couple of reasons, presumably because the scientists just had to do a balancing act and came up with the number 6, but also because guidance previously, which pretty much no one remembers, was already that you were only supposed to meet in a group of 6 in many cases. So they've tried to keep that continuity across the previous rules over to the current rules. But you're right, it's a harsh cutoff. It is 6 people. The government admits this isn't a magic number. It's just the best number of the numbers that they could have picked. And you can't meet your sister and her children socially with all your kids there, but you can if you work together. So Lauren Gillespie works away with 2 children that need minded by the grandparents. But their family home is already 6 people. I am going to quickly look this up because there is an exemption for childcare. Bear with me, because essentially there's definitely an exemption if two parents are separated. So I'm not going to give you an absolute cast iron guarantee, Lauren, but I believe that it is allowed. Sorry for the fumbling over this, because, and this is the way the law is worded, there will be an exemption to continue existing arrangements where children do not live in the same household as both their parents. So that doesn't quite factor in the grandparents, but if it's a regular childcare arrangement, you could probably make the argument. It's one of these knife-edge things, and I'm sorry that I'm not being more helpful, but essentially you've got a cast iron exemption if two parents are separated and the children live in both houses. It seems to be a little bit more vague if it's an arrangement like grandparents, but registered childcare is allowed. Swapping between houses for separated parents is allowed. And so there may be an argument there, but we're expecting more guidance in the next few days. Steve Hempsell asks, will all protests be broken up? Can a large group of people make random signs and call their social gathering a protest? That's two questions, Steve. The answer to the first one is no, not all protests will be broken up. There is an exemption for protests. However, you can't, it's a very good idea, but you can't just go to the pub and draw a load of signs on the back of the napkins and say that you're holding a protest. The protests, there's a wording around it. They have to be organised in compliance with COVID-19 secure guidance and subject to strict risk assessments. And what that means in human speak is that you have to plan the protest in advance. You have to tell the police you're holding a protest, and there has to be a point of contact for the police to phone on the protest to deal with any issues. So it has to be quite organised. We're not talking about like a random wildcat protest or something claiming to be a protest. So Stacey, I run a pub and now have to close from Monday by 10 p.m. every day. Will there be any more help for us as we lose trade? Stacey, I'm not quite clear, because I'm not sure if you've misread the rules or not, because in Bolton, you do have to close at 10 p.m, but there isn't currently any kind of 10 p.m. rule, as far as I know it, in the rest of England. There might be in other local areas, but that's not confirmed yet. And that's not happening at the moment. So without knowing all the details of your case, I can't say. What I can say about the help element is the government have confirmed a new grant yesterday for firms that are forced to close by these restrictions, like in Bolton. So every 3 weeks, they can get £1,500. Now, £500 a week if you run a pub is obviously not much money, but that is what it is. And you know, I haven't made the rules. I'm just here to try and explain them. So if you are in an area that's forced to close, you can get that help. The one problem with it is you can only get the £1,500 after your first 3 weeks of being closed. So that's a real problem. In the meantime, of course, you have also got the furlough scheme. People can be refurloughed, but that ends at the end of October. Matthew Greenfield, can I meet my partner who lives in another household? What are the guidelines for that type of meeting? This is one of the bits that's actually less strict than it was before, Matthew. So the law is that you definitely can, because you can have a gathering of up to 6 people in any one place. The guidelines are that you should stay socially distant from people in other households. Now, clearly that doesn't really work, I assume, for meeting your partner. What I would say, though, is that that is not the law. There is no law against you, you know, sleeping with or cuddling or anything else your partner. The one thing that did used to be in the law, it used to be that any gathering of different households in a private place was illegal, and that was at the height of lockdown. It was sort of nicknamed the sex ban, because effectively that's what it was, although I don't think anyone actually got fined for that, because the police aren't going to break into your house. So Matthew, it's fine to meet your partner, and if you want to be intimate with your partner, technically it's against the guidelines, but it is not against the law. Are children considered in the group of 6, says Deeply? Yes, that is right. The group of 6 applies to people no matter what their age is. So if you have 2 twin toddlers, they count towards the group of 6, even though children are at less risk of getting very ill from coronavirus, and is, people believe, a less risk of actually passing it on as well. Callie Thompson, we are a family of 7. Can we go on holiday? Callie, it depends on whether the family live together. So if you all live in the same household, if you're 2 parents with 5 young children who all live with you, yes, you can, because you are the same household. If you are 2 parents with 3 of the children are grown up and living separately, all in house shares in kind of Birmingham and Manchester, no, you can't. You would have to choose one person to drop out. So 6 of those people from different households can go on holiday together, but you can't have 7. Mad Affiliate, why don't we have an app like there is in Germany? Well, Mad Affiliate, who I assume is not your real name, we were meant to have an app several months ago, but the government essentially had to tear it all up and start again, partly because it just didn't really work. On iPhones, it was, I think, detecting something like 4% of people's close contacts at the time of the trial. So they basically had problems between the sort of software and the hardware. So they decided to tear it all up, start again with an app that sort of uses a system devised by Google and Apple. That app is being trialled in northeast London, near the Olympic Park, and on the Isle of Wight. I haven't got an update for you on how those trials are going, but if it works, eventually, many months after it's promised, the theory is that you'll be able to use that app to monitor close contacts, even of people you don't know. You'll be able to scan QR codes as you go into a pub or a restaurant to show that you were there, and you'll get alerts if people you've been in contact with test positive. Now, Sarah Grono asks the question that is on all of our minds: what about Christmas? We've been invited to my uncle's house. There'll be 6 adults and 2 2.5-year-olds. Sarah, so this, under the current rules that are coming in on Monday, that gathering will not be allowed. What we don't know is whether the current rules from Monday will still be in place by Christmas. Now, what we have been sort of assured, although no one has said this publicly, is that there will be 3 months at least when these laws are in place. I think Boris Johnson doesn't particularly want to say that because it's pretty pessimistic. So that brings us to nearly Christmas. But it could be much longer. So yesterday at the briefing, the chief medical officer said that we're going to have a difficult period until spring. So that's more like 6 months. And if there's no breakthrough, such as a vaccine or this sort of mass testing that can get you every day, then potentially these rules will still be there for Christmas. So we don't know if they'll be there for Christmas, but if they are, you can't go to your uncle's house. Lauren says, how can you police this? How will the police know you don't live together? That's a very good point, Lauren, and I suspect that that will become an issue next week. It becomes obviously easier to police when it's a massive gathering that's breaking the rules, but if it's 7 people, then clearly there's a bit of trouble there. The other element of it is that while police do have the power to fine you for having a house party or going to a house party with too many people, they don't have powers of entry under this law. So they don't have the power to break your door down, to sort of drag people out who are taking part in the party. So there are issues with policing at law, and I think, frankly, the government is relying on people's honesty and common sense, which, of course, doesn't always work. I think we'll have another lockdown. So I said earlier that the government is trying to avoid one, and I really wouldn't want to put money on it. I think the government has shown that it's trying to do a whole load of other things to avoid another lockdown, and that a full lockdown is the absolute last resort, the nuclear option. So clearly, the chances of it are much lower than they might be, but the virus is unpredictable. It can flare up. We're going through into winter where it spreads more easily because lots of people are inside together. So you can't guarantee that there won't be one. But thankfully, I'm not in charge of making that decision, Sammy. Right, I think we've got one or two more questions, and then we're going to close it off at about 11 o'clock. Thank you for all your questions so far, and thank you for sticking with it. And I hope I haven't been completely useless. Amanda Ellis says, with all the school outbreaks happening, at what time do we reassess the risks? So what the government would claim is that they're reassessing the risks all the time based on these outbreaks. So what they have been telling us is that even though case numbers are going up very, very sharply in people aged 17 to 30, especially sort of 17 to 21 uni age, that hasn't been happening with school kids and sort of 14, 13, 12-year-olds or primary school kids. So they claim that schools are, at the moment, a safe thing to keep open, and that kids themselves are obviously at quite low risk, even though they could bring it home and spread it to other people. There is no hard and fast number, Amanda, as to when that would be reassessed. It's essentially a political judgment. Ministers really don't want to close schools in England, and they would, in fact, close other things like pubs, is what they've said first, in order to stop schools closing. So, Jade says, is it a new law? And I believe this is the last question. Is it a new law or rather a guide regarding the maximum 6? And would you get fined if you break the law? It is the law. That's essentially what the change is. So before it was guidelines were that you should only have 6 or thereabouts, depending on your circumstance, people in your home, or in an outdoor space, I should say as well. The new law is a hard limit on 6 people, a legal limit in households, in gardens, and in other places where you are gathering together as one group. The fine is £100 from Monday. That can be dished out by police. You can also be asked to leave where you are to break up the group, and police can sort of break up those groups if they're in parks and send them on their way. Clearly, the fine you would probably be asked to break up the group first, and if you started not complying, then the police would fine you. That tends to be how these things work. But yes, the short answer is it's a law, it's not a guide, and yes, you can get fined if you break the law. So thank you to everyone for contributing your questions. I know it can be quite confusing, and Lord knows I perhaps have been confused at the answers to 1 or 2, but I hope I've been able to help you as much as I can. And, good luck dealing with all this when it comes in on Monday.